Hi, welcome back to the Local Food Summit. In this session, Becky and I are going to head down to Fairbury, Illinois to Spence Farm. Kris and Marty Travis and their son Will, they've developed a consortium of 60 other farms that bring all of their food to them once a week. They take it up to the restaurants and they come back with the checks for these farmers. It's some of the best money that a farmer can make because we've completely cut out the middleman. And the food is some of the freshest food that the customers can get. It's a win-win-win situation. The work they are doing is so important that a documentary film crew found them and did a movie called Sustainable, documenting a year on the Spence Farm and what it means to grow food. It's more than just the growing of food. It's the growing of community. It's the growing of health. It's the growing of the economy. There's a lot involved when you grow food well. It can change the way we look at the world and the way that we live. The documentary that featured Marty, Kris, and Will is called Sustainable. And I'm going to go ahead and show you the trailer right now. It's only 2 minutes long, but it's very powerful. I hope you'll have a chance to watch the entire video.
Food is the most basic of all human needs. Man can manage to live without shelter, without clothing, even without love. But man can't remain alive without food.
The way we produce food and the way we eat affects almost everything.
Scientists have discovered a huge dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico.
This farm was settled by my fourth great-grandfather. When the settlers first came, they had to be sustainable.
There's 120 million acres of corn and soy rotations. But no farmer goes out there because they're in love with corn and soy.
We cannot have a sustainable agriculture today. Our soils have become too degraded, our plants are too unhealthy.
What we wanted to be about was a change in our food system.
If we wanted an agricultural system that was minimally dependent on non-renewable resources, what would that system look like?
There's always the pushback, organic can't feed the world.
We have a true opportunity to change our grain food system.
How do we improve the health of our citizens? How do we treat our land more sustainably? These questions are answerable.
Having been raised on a farm, that's all I've ever known. To me, there's no better way of life.
Part of what I wanted to do tonight is understand how we can work together so that we're not all doing it at the same time.
This is really not about us. It's about generations to come.
We're trying to reconnect to our food supply, and we have to do it one little step at a time.
We need to realize that we owe a debt to those of the past, and we can only repay that debt to people of the future.
I'm really hopeful that what we're doing today, everybody else will copy.
Chefs are like rock stars these days, but we wouldn't be able to do it without the farmer.
It's a noble calling to be able to provide food for your fellow human beings.
If our culture is going to thrive, it has to be on quality of life. And that's what the farmers give to us.
So, well, what the reason that we wanted to connect with you all is there's this the Local Food Summit, which is Lynette Marie and Michael have this idea and this feeling that the local food movement is not just important because it just makes sense and it'd be nice to heal some land and get better food for people. But they said on the grander scale, if you were to take it and if we made the decision that all food had to be grown more or less locally, and that while you're doing it, you have to heal the land at the same time. You actually have to be building topsoil on an annual basis, holding more water to a certain level and then maintaining those levels. That when you really look at it from the standpoint of the ripples and how it affects people's health and the economy, it literally could change the planet. It could change the culture. So, of course, Becky and I are interested in what does it take to create permanent culture. And, of course, it all comes down to the land, it comes down to food, so it's really basic. So then our story goes back, we were trying to remember how we met you guys. And I don't know if you remember.
Go ahead.
Well, I think you just had an open field day through the University of Illinois. At that time, Deborah Kavanaugh Grant and Dan Anderson were hosting field days, and I think it came out. And then I had a chance to meet you, and then a couple other folks that were involved at the time. Deborah.
And then I think you also were a participant in the Farm Beginnings class.
Yes.
And Kris and I were instrumental at the beginning of that.
That's right.
Sandra came out and
Yeah.
was our
That's right.
Yeah.
So through, you're right, through Center for Sustainable Community.
So it has been a while.
Yeah, it has
Definitely.
been a while.
And we've aged beautifully.
Yes, we have. Aged? Who's aged?
Speak for myself.
Well, I think, so then what we started doing, as soon as we started doing permaculture courses, and we started doing local ones, the ones in our own community, we did what we could to get out here and beat a path to your door and have our students experience your farm experience. So what's been fascinating for us is we've been watching you at least once a year we're out here, and every year we can see the progress.
There is an evolution, isn't there?
Which is quite an evolutionary process. So I'm wondering if you'd be willing to just start from a little bit from the beginning, and let's talk a little bit about the farm. Which generation of farmers are you two? And can you tell us a little bit about how the farm was found, and maybe a little bit about the early days of the farm?
You want to do that?
Yeah. So this farm was settled in 1830 by my fifth great grandfather, so I'm the 8th generation here.
Wow.
Dad's 7th. We're about to have a 9th generation, so
congratulations.
We moved, the farms stayed in the family, and up until the turn of the century of 1900, it kept growing, and it was about 1,000 acres around that time, about 1900. And after that, then it slowly started dividing as people passed away,
and how the farm gets divvied up to heirs and so forth.
And all that. So we're back down to the original 160 acres at this point that was bought from the government in 1830. So,
wow.
And during my growing up, my grandfather farmed, but passed away when I was 12.
Wow.
So I missed out on a lot of things that I knew that he could have taught. So really, we didn't come from a farming background, education-wise. And so for 30-some years, I built furniture instead. But then when my grandmother was about to pass away and my mom really didn't want to move back here, we began to look at the farm in a much different way. And we looked at it with eyes of those who want to build community, those who want to build natural systems.
Well, and the point was to try and do everything we could to try and save the farm, so it wasn't just important to us, but it was important to the community around, so that if something were to happen to us, the farm would still be here, it wouldn't go away.
So there are other people besides yourselves that were interested in you succeeding.
That's right. And as we continued to build that, we, Kris and Will and I saw, young people in the community moving away from their families' farms. Their parents didn't want them to stay on the farm because there wasn't enough 3,000-acre parcels for them to make a living on. And it's too unpredictable. So we began looking at ways of creating opportunities for the young people to have, even if it's an acre or 5 acres, that they could get carved out or niched out on a family farm. And that has, that's worked really pretty well. To where, some of our earliest farmers that were in our Stewards of the Land group, 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old kids doing $20,000 worth of product sales on an acre. That's opportunity, and that's enablement. And then as they continued to have success, the neighbor kids would see, or their friends would see what was happening, and word of mouth began to happen, and we began to have greater and greater buy-in.
Well, and it's interesting. I mean, just up the road about a mile or two, there's a whole section, and just about every single property around that section, every single house, they're in the stewards group or in the down at the farmers group that we run. I mean, there's like a 2 or 3 mile radius there that I'd say there's 8 different
almost
farms.
8 different farms now.
Well, let's back up. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Sure.
Can you tell us about stewards of the land?
Sure. So in 2005, my wife Kris and I really were looking at what was happening with the community and young people. And at that time, we were also realizing that we had made an entrance into selling some produce, not only at the local grocery store, but into some of the restaurants in Chicago. Realized very quickly there was no way that we were ever going to supply any one of them with everything that they wanted. And realized that we could have a conversation with those chefs and ask them what kinds of things they were looking for. And they began providing lists. So we began talking to folks that were interested here in the community of what they could grow on small scale. And, you know, Farmer A could grow 50 pounds of green beans, but we needed 200 pounds a week, so we could get Farmer B to grow 50 and Farmer C, and all of a sudden we could work cooperatively. Mm-hmm. So we created an LLC called Stewards of the Land, and it was a member group of about 25 farms.
It was capped at 25 farms, couldn't have any more, mainly so that it can still be a small educational group and you could still meet in everybody's home and everyone, it wasn't like some big 500 member organization that you all can't get together monthly and meet at someone's house.
So yeah, Will's right. It became,
Scalable,
exactly, and it was replicable.
Yeah.
Because every community ought to have this, and it's doable. Mm-hmm. And they wrote their own bylaws, and I was so impressed how they, wrote beautiful bylaws of how they wanted to be, a member of the community, and they do this for their families and to learn about, natural processes and growing things naturally. So fast forward a few years, and the community, we filled that first 25. A second group was formed, and the first group, we then realized we needed to have some sense of evolution or succession, so that once a farm got up and going and didn't need the added marketing and insurance that the group got scaled, mm-hmm. that they could go on to an advisory group and make room for a new farmer to come in. Mm. So we had, the high school as part of the group, and we had other members, and the second group also had members from a local university. So it began to morph. Then in the last few years, both groups continue on to this day, but in the last few years, we had so many more farmers continue to ask, their farmers markets weren't going as well, or their CSA numbers were dropping, or whatever.
Well, and most of the stewards and legacy farms were new farms coming into it that hadn't done it as a career before.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them. The other farms that we're getting into now that Dad's getting ready to talk about are farms that are already established that may just need help moving product in a different way than they know how to.
Yeah, and so the demand continues to increase, mm-hmm. but the capacity for those original stewards farms was still somewhat small scale. Mm-hmm. And so with this increased demand, we began being very selective about folks that we wanted to either seek out or that we wanted to speak with as they sought us. So currently, we're at nearly 60 farms that we represent. It works out to where last year we delivered 50 out of 52 weeks. We took Christmas and New Year's off. but we also delivered just short of 55 tons of product last year.
Fantastic.
And so, and we're on track for a lot more than that this year. It's life-changing for many of these farmers. This past week I had two farmers, two grown men, almost break down in tears that this is so valuable to them that they can't believe that they have this opportunity now. So,
why is it so significant for them? I mean, why is it different for them working through the one of the groups rather than just doing it themselves? Where's the benefit to them?
part of it is both of them have come to the realization that they're just one farm, and when they're up against a larger company that's buying their product, they don't have any leverage. Mm-hmm. And that company can say, well, I will give you this price for it. And it's half of what we're charging our customers. And so when I can tell that farmer, I can double your price and I can take all that you have, it's not too hard of a leap.
Yes.
Yeah.
So how is that happening then? So what you've done is you basically, effectively, you're bringing the farmer almost to the back door of the restaurant in Chicago.
Yes, we are.
And the restaurant in Chicago is paying what they are paying. You know, it's still for them, it's a fair price to them. It's the same price they would be paying if they were buying from Big Ag.
That's right.
But instead they're paying that same price to you guys, maybe a bonus for the fact that the food is organic.
And
the food is not all organic.
Some is certified.
There are a few certified, but it's all grown by the standards.
Okay.
It's relationships.
Yeah.
Again.
Yep. The chefs want to be able to come to every farm that they buy product from and ask questions and see the product and see the setup and know that what they're getting is really what they're being told, and that there's nothing being hidden from them. And so it's having that relationship where they can come and ask any question they want and know that everything's going to be open. Is what
that transparency is super important. And that transparency comes all the way down. When we send an invoice each week to each chef, each restaurant, it lists every single farm and their farm name and their product that is going to that restaurant. It's not that we're buying it and reselling it.
Right.
And every product that gets delivered has to have the label with the farm name on it also. So that way there's traceability with everything as well. I mean, you know where everything's coming from. Wow.
Is that a requirement? Is that a legal
It's ours.
It's your requirement. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
The other thing that we've done as a farm, yes, we've had all this exposure and press and all of this stuff. And that's all great and good, but it's more important for us to continue to allow those opportunities to be passed on. So instead of marketing things under the Spence Farm label, we created a separate LLC called Down at the Farms that is somewhat innocuous, and we become just one of those other farms on the invoice. And that way, all the farms have an equal footing. They have, nobody's one-upping. Yeah. But we're still the face of the deliveries. And so we're representing not only the farmers to the chefs, but the chefs back to the farmers.
Yeah. So is it really that important to the chefs that they know where the food is coming from? I mean, have you found chefs? Is that what's going on now? Is that there are chefs that just really want this? I mean, if they really want it, does it mean then that they have customers that are driving this request as well?
I think in certain instances, for sure, the customers are driving the request. And there's also the point where the chefs, they may be educating their customers. They may have the drive for it, and their customers may not quite know, but they've taught their staff well enough to educate the customers to create that demand within their customer base.
So a couple things. So we also do make ourselves available to the restaurants for quote unquote farm dinners. And we have several restaurants that will have us come up. They'll have a separate evening just for education and teaching their guests. So we have one restaurant in Oak Park called The Heritage, coming up in a couple weeks, is hosting a farm dinner for 40-some of their guests.
They're closing the restaurant for the night just for the farm dinner.
So we'll go up, speak, and have conversation, and they'll do 4 or 5 courses, and everything will be from the farms. And we'll interpret that, and we'll talk about that, and why that's important, and why those guests, the dollars that they're spending in that restaurant, find their way back to the farm. And then that product, that whole circle gets completed. Those same chefs, this past weekend, after service on Sunday brunch, they came down,
Stayed overnight,
camped
slept
out,
outside,
and then spent Monday helping us in the field. And then went back, and we saw them on Wednesday delivery. It is very much a relationship. And we've turned down 20-some restaurants this spring already.
and about 30 more last year.
You can only do what you can do. And so we need more people. We need more farmers.
We need more farmers rather than scaling up.
Yeah,
to produce
that's it
more.
exactly.
Yeah, because I mean, can you speak to maybe the quality of life, or at what point do your farmers, and do you have this conversation?
Mm-hmm.
You go, enough is enough. I don't want to produce anymore. I still want to have.
Well, what we always ask the new farmers is, how much do you need to live on? What's the amount that you're comfortable knowing that if you have this much, I'll be set. So that helps to know what size they're going to end up being, to know what type of quality of life they're going to get and everything. Everyone has different needs in life.
Do you ask other questions too?
We ask a lot of them.
One is dollars and cents. What do you need to live on? And everyone has to have.
And what's your dream?
What do you enjoy?
What's your dream? How do you see this playing out? What do you like to do? Mm-hmm. What are you good at? Yeah. What are you not so great at or excited about doing?
What grows well on your soil?
What issues do you have with crops or animals or livestock, or how open are you to learning new things?
Do any of your farmers have other jobs too?
Some.
Some do?
Yeah.
I'd say at this point the majority of the stewards farmers do.
Mm-hmm.
Majority of the legacy farmers do not.
Right.
And then the majority of the
down
at the farms do not.
Right. We actually have 2 members of our Down at the Farms group now that are chefs that have restaurants that also have their farms. And now whatever extra they have gets sold off. Wow. So there is that commitment. Yeah. And as we started, our whole scalable project was basically going to the restaurants, because we knew that we could do that much. We could take away a restaurant or add a restaurant or those kinds of things. But we kept getting all this pushback from consumers, general public. Well, why do they get all the good stuff? Why can't we buy that? So as we've been able to scale up, now our real push has been to make good food available, clean food available, where people buy food. And that's at particular grocery stores. And to really be an advocate to those grocery stores to create those relationships with their farmers. And we have many different experiences that we're involved in building those relationships and helping the stores build those relationships with their customers.
So you're talking about just locally, or are you talking about, is it going beyond local in terms of you starting to hit some of the larger communities?
We're hitting
in Chicago?
into Champaign. We have an opportunity in the next year to do a large market co-op in Chicago. Don't have enough farmers yet to do that.
So do you feel like you need to take that on? I mean, or to do the educational part of it, or
I think
inspirational part?
I think part of what we continue to see our role is not only cheerleader, but also mentor for other folks to build these systems out in geographic pods. I've done some work in South Dakota for a number of years with groups out there. I want to do the same thing in the Chicagoland area. There's folks.
Talk with Matt and Greg about going to Texas.
Yep.
Talk in Texas of doing the same thing.
Indiana now. I had a call a week ago from a lady that wants to understand what we're doing. So I think that there's interest. I think it's scary. It's new endeavors. And it's also, I think it's scary for farmers or people to work together, to learn how to do that, relearn how to do that.
When we were getting into the Champaign grocery store down there, we got together a group of farmers from down in that area that are already going and established, and tried to get everyone kind of together to create a group that could supply that store. And we found out that it's much harder to ask a bunch of farmers to work together and go through us as a marketing and delivery service, so that the restaurant doesn't have 50 different farmers coming in the back door with 50 different invoices at who knows what hours throughout the day, what day they're coming. That way we could do one delivery and one invoice and all that. Well, they didn't want to work together as a bunch of farmers in one group. They didn't want to be having that middle person go. They wanted to be able to do it on their own, which I understand, but it's a lot easier to take new farmers who've never dealt with it before and have them have that person than to take existing farmers that have been doing it for a while and get them on board with the program.
It's interesting that that's come up for you all, because that's one of the things that we've experienced too. Becky and I have lived in our small community for 38 years, and it's always been the Achilles heel of any project we want to do. It's always been the human relationships. It hasn't been the design. It hasn't been the project or how we're going to do things. It's always been the challenges. Somebody gets their feelings hurt or something, and communication is poor or whatever, and people get a little bent out of shape, and it just becomes all about the drama. So I think part of the miracle of what you guys have been able to pull off is somehow you started out with a vision, and people bought in on the vision. Well, that's it. It's already established. It's not like get a bunch of people together and let's figure this out.
Right.
It's like, we're doing this. The train is leaving. These are the parameters. Do you want to go? Is that pretty much how it happened?
It is. And you know what our core rule is, our motto. She does. We only work with nice people.
And that's serious too. We've dropped some farmers because of it, and we've dropped some chefs because of it. We're not going to deal with people.
Life is way too short. There is too much excitement. There is too much good that can be done to have folks not want to play in the same sandbox. Yeah. So, and that's okay. It's totally fine. We actually do. It's in our bylaws. And it gives us a lot of comfort to be able to say that. It's not trite and it's not cute, but it's real. Yeah. So, I mean, and that has allowed us to encourage other farmers to understand that they need to treat each other with respect too.
Yeah. Well, no doubt you guys are modeling that, so that's huge, and that's what's important. And then when you have those meetings, you can model that. And the fact that you set it up so fair that you all are trying to be as invisible as possible, at the same time doing the work of representing everybody. When you tap on that door and you have that relationship with the chef, you're creating that relationship for all 24 other farmers.
And it's interesting. So I met with all the senior management, the corporate managers at the grocery store yesterday in Champaign. And, they're coming back and saying, you have been more than patient with us. We understand your commitment to this project, and we need to continue to amp up on our side. And when I asked them, what else can we do on our side? They said, you've done everything that you need to do. It's on us now. Yeah. That's the kind of relationship, conversations that we can have. Yeah. That doesn't happen very often.
Could we shift a little bit on the conversation? Because we've talked about how you're growing the food by organic standards. And so we're interested in organic food, but many of us who've been interested in this for a long time, we know that just because something is organic doesn't necessarily mean it's going to have a lot of life in it.
It's true.
That there's plenty of organic food that doesn't have herbicides or pesticides or artificial chemicals in it. But if the soil is not alive, the plant survives and there is fruit and there is a yield. But we know that the quality of the energy and the amount of nutrients in that could be very different from a plant over here that's been raised somewhat differently. Do you have a program that you're using to develop your soils, or what is your relationship with the food that you're growing, and how is it that you're doing what you can to make it as healthy as possible? Is that a priority for you all?
It's a huge priority. Most of our soils throughout the Midwest and maybe throughout most of the country have been so degraded for so long that we can't grow the quality and quantity that the genetic potential of those crops truly has. And so we have to begin not only to heal the land, but all of what that soil has as far as biology and nutrition and so forth. And understanding that those plants can only be filled with that nutrition when that soil is healthy. And those plants can only be immune to disease and pest pressure when they're totally healthy. And they can only transfer that immunity to us when that is the case. So we've had a tremendous learning curve. And we've had tremendous mentors in John Kemp's organization, Advancing Eco-Ag. Gary Redding, Jason Stoll, Nathan Harmon, and John himself have been here and continue to give us guidance and learning how to deal with issues that are limiting for us. And it's working. Some faster than others, but I look at the fact that we didn't degrade these soils overnight, and they're probably not going to regenerate as tomorrow.
Yeah.
It takes a lot longer to fix something than it does to break it. So you can break the soils like that. It takes a long time to rebuild it.
But we're seeing where, we're working with those plants and understanding what we're looking at, truly seeing those plants for what they are as living beings, and equating what their needs are and creating that parallel to our health. So when a plant is short on calcium, we understand that it mirrors really what we as humans are too. We don't have strong structure, weak bones. The plant may have issues of poor fruit quality and those kinds of things. But we have to understand the biology of all of that, in that we can only get those nutritional pieces into that plant when we have good soil biology. And by doing that, we have to build upon. And we're trying to be very, very observant of what's happening in our crops, but in the natural world, understanding what weeds we have or don't have, what bug pressure we have or don't have, what beneficial bugs we have, and soil life and bird life and butterflies and all of that. As we build that whole system back, we get more and more players and partners in that. And I think if we're good farmers, we want all of those players and partners to work together.
Yeah. What does the program look like then? I mean, what does it look like if you're trying to support the soil, help the soil, help the plants? What does that look like? I mean, does it consist of buying in manure from the neighbors, or what do you guys?
What we've done, I mean, we do our soil tests every year or two to understand how we're doing. It's kind of our report card. But we're adding soil biology as far as mycorrhizal and rhizogenesis and all kinds of rhizobacteria into that soil, especially in the fall, and feeding that with carbohydrates, molasses, and calcium products as a foliar into the fall, so that we can build that soil biology even over the winter and into the early spring. As we plant our seeds, we're inoculating those seeds with bacteria.
Okay.
So that once that germination happens, you have biology happening right immediately.
Yeah.
And that biology is breaking those nutrients down for that plant immediately. As it comes up, we're then evaluating the strength of that. We're also saving our own seed for many of the crops and trying to build upon our natural environment here and building that resiliency within our own seed. And I think we can do better that way, definitely. But as that plant begins to grow, we're watching that plant, if not daily, several times during the week, understanding what that plant's trying to tell us, how it's doing. Are there issues? Are the leaves wide and full and green and vibrant looking? Are we having disease issues showing up or whatever? We also have, that we've just started to make use of this year, by doing sap analysis, taking older, mature leaves, sending those into a lab along with the most mature new leaves, and having that lab compare how that plant was doing at the beginning and how it's doing now. And we can do that throughout the course of that crop, and then foliar feed that crop what it's missing between each interspersion of leaf sample. So that
are you talking a few weeks, or are you talking
a few weeks? Yeah, every couple of weeks.
Okay.
So we can spoon feed that plant whatever that plant doesn't utilize at the moment. It can put out through root exudates into that soil to be made available either as nutrition for that plant as it's going forward, and that biology can sequester the carbon. And we can build that whole system, that plant, so that it has everything it needs and the immunity is building.
And then it starts building the soil.
And then next year, and next year, and next year, we're just building on that whole system.
So that's what I recall from what John Kemp has said in his work, is that as the plant becomes more and more healthy, it becomes able to defend against insect and disease pressure because of its robustness. And as it generates more energy than it needs, it turns that excess energy into lipids or fats.
That's right.
And those they will take and put into the soil as an exudate to store extra food when they need it. They don't need to store it on their body.
Right.
They store it in the soil, and then they've got something. Even in terms of drought, I understand.
That's right.
They can access those nutrients even when the soil looks bone dry.
Right.
Those nutrients aren't water soluble. They're based in an oil solubility. So the plant becomes incredibly immune to floods and disease, or to too much water,
or too little water, or all those things. And that's the exciting part. To be honest, John has figured out so many things that make it such that we can now understand in a much broader scope instead of, throwing things at plants because we're knee-jerking and grab the Band-Aids or grab the tourniquets. We've got this. No, let's step back and understand, how did we get to this disaster to start with? And I think while it's not easy to go through issues of crises and moments that are stressful when you have a crop that's under stress for whatever reason, but it helps to understand how that plant or that crop is struggling and what we can do to help that.
Yeah. You can call that the epigenetics, right? It's like
Yes.
if you can provide the plant with the nutrients it needs when it needs them,
yes,
then all of a sudden the plant has this when it needs it, then this, and it becomes stronger and stronger and stronger.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things that John says, we don't really know what the limits to these yields are. That comes right out of the Permaculture
right.
Designer's Manual. It's like the limits to yield are really in the mind of the designer and their ability to work with nature to create something.
And that genetic potential, we're never increasing the yield. All we're really doing is trying to limit the yield loss. And if we look at it in those terms, that seed has the potential. I mean, John says corn has the potential genetically to have 7 ears on a stalk and 1,100 bushels per acre.
And what is the average now?
Maybe 200?
Maybe.
Not even 200, yeah, that's right. In Midwest, we're right close to 200. But you're saying it's almost 6 times
It's
more?
almost 6 times that.
Wow.
Not that we need 6 times as much corn grown in this country.
What? John's got, 120,000 pounds per acre of tomatoes is genetic potential, and he has some
Yes.
growers that are real close to that.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh.
That's a lot of tomatoes.
Yeah. And what's the typical for a tomato grow?
About
6 or 8, something like that.
maybe a tenth that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're between 10 and 20% of what our potential is in most any crop.
So you're growing largely annual vegetables.
Mm-hmm.
So you have, as part of your system, are you using, while the fields are fallow, are you putting cover crops on, or using animal manures, or do you graze animals through the system, or are there any other inputs besides
All of those.
All of those.
There's
more cover crops than putting animals onto
the whole area.
the whole area. We do graze animals, but we don't typically do them over the areas that we're going to be seeding produce into. We'll do them over the grain areas, and we do spread it's not straight manure, it's composted, of course, and it's all our straw pack and everything from the wintertime from the cows and the pigs, we compost all that, and then we typically spread that over where we're going to put either our tomatoes and peppers or our potatoes into.
Okay.
And a lot of times we'll let that go for 2 years.
Yeah.
Just to break down and begin to build. Instead of the bacterial part, we want some of that fungal activity in there too. And then, we do have orchards, the woodland, so we're able to forage items there too. We do a lot of small grains, as Will was saying, a lot of heritage grains, corns, wheats, rye. And then we have, almost half of the farm is in alfalfa. We're almost better than that in alfalfa, so that gets rotation through. And we're working hard to use those same AEA products on the alfalfa and on our pastures to where we can build.
Along with the orchards as well.
Yeah.
You use it. I understand your entry into this whole thing was through maple syrup.
In a way, yeah.
In a way.
Yeah.
But do you use it on those trees at all?
We haven't yet.
We could. Maple syrup isn't much of a focus for us. It doesn't make as much sense for us to spend as much time and effort doing all the syrup as it does for us to spend time and effort making sure we get our grains planted early and getting radishes or onions or whatever out in the field and getting in the hoop house. So at this point, syrup is mainly done just for our enjoyment and
if the season's
to restock.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but through all of that, I hear a tremendous amount of diversity that you have on 160 acres.
Yeah.
You've got forested area, farmland,
prairie
animals,
area, orchards, plantation areas for native pawpaws, wild plums, elderberries, raspberries, blackberries, and understanding that all of those together are important to make up a total farm system.
Yeah.
Well, the one of the things that you mentioned, both of you have mentioned this to me before, but that to you the health of the food is really important. That the highest quality food. Why is that so? I mean, how did you even make the connection to high quality food?
Flavor. We've had cherry tomatoes from 6 different farms, same variety. They all taste different. Why is that? When you take a Brix reading of them, you see why that is. And they're all grown, organically grown, but something's missing in each of those. And so it caused us to begin thinking, so why and what's missing? What can we do to build on to have the highest quality product? And if we have that high quality product, usually the production comes along with that. When you've got a healthy, super healthy, robust plant, it's going to produce a lot of it.
Yeah.
And then we begin to consume that plant. I mean, we want to eat well too. And all of a sudden, you can tell a difference. It's super interesting. We have one of our restaurants that makes potato salad with our potatoes whenever they have potatoes. They feed us each week, usually a lunch.
When you go up, is it delivery?
Yeah, they've got it waiting and off we go. When we run out of potatoes, you can tell the difference in the potato salad.
Oh, they get it from other sources and you taste it. And it's not
Immediately.
Yeah.
When it's our potatoes, you're tasting a potato. When it's different potatoes, you're tasting the dressing.
Marty, tell us the story. I remember you mentioning this before of the you were taking a walk one evening or one morning, and one of your neighbors was driving by. She stopped her car, rolled down the window. What was that about?
So we had a dear neighbor several years ago that lived a few miles over, and it was a time at the very beginning when we were taking local product into the grocery store and doing the restaurants and just trying to do as large a diversity as we could. And she stopped and she said, I really, really am so glad that you guys are taking stuff into town. And I just want you to know that I buy as much from you guys as I possibly can from all the farmers. She says, I'm dealing with cancer. And she says, this is super important to me. She says, the doctor said this kind of food is good for me. And she says, it is. She says, it reminds me of growing up. And she was in her 90s. And she says, so this is what is feeding me and, in my mind, keeping me going. What more can we do as a society but take care of each other and feed each other well?
When I was 21, 22 years old, kind of starting my own quest and waking up, one of the books that really woke me up to understanding more about the culture was a book called Food is Your Best Medicine by Dr. Henry Beeler. And it never somehow, how did I grow up and be 21 years old, and somehow, other than my mother telling me, eat your vegetables and take your vitamins, how did I never get that connection? That obviously, whatever, if all you put is junk in your mouth, how is your body going to do all the things it needs to do.
Most people don't get that connection still.
But that's huge. And
It
so
is.
there are people, we're working with Jordan Rubin, and he was dying at age 19. And it was food that brought him back to health. And so he's very committed. And many people, that's their last resort. Doctors have given up on them, and they go home and they just say, well, out of desperation.
But why can't we make it our first resort?
Yeah, of course. Of course.
My mom had breast cancer, and I finally got her to start eating healthy again and everything while her treatment was going on. And once her treatment was over, she went right back to what she was doing before. It's like, that's what caused it in the first place.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
It's hard.
It is.
But
It is and it isn't. It is what
it's
people...
embarrassingly simple.
It is.
But-
But we all get into a routine or into some mindset that this is good, that I deserve this, or I've earned the right to have whatever it is I want to eat. But there's consequences to every action, and there's consequences to all of that, and those are choices we make.
Yeah.
Each of us.
Well, I think the last question that I'd like to ask, and this is kind of more directed to you, Will, but so when you all, actually there's two questions. One is when you all started and you started working with your dad, you were still in high school, I think. You probably had this idea of what farming would be like. So I'm curious as to whether or not the way you were thinking it would unfold is unfolding, or is it a lot different?
The way I envisioned it, I'd say it's dead on, but we never really had an idea of how it was going to unfold. It's just evolved, keeps evolving as we go. You never know what's going to fall in your lap, and you just kind of run with that. So I would say when I was in high school, I mean, we were probably a 16th of the size that we are now, on about a 16th as much ground as we are on now, and we just kept doubling in size from year to year. And as we get bigger, we'd get different equipment that would help us to go along that way, and we've gotten to the point now to where we use with the hay field being 50 acres, we use all of the land that we've got, and now at this point, it's just making sure that we can refine and do less hand labor and make it more efficient of our time, since it's really just us two most of the year. We've got two boys that work for us that are neighbors, but it's really just making sure that we can do as much, work as smart as we possibly can. I don't know what else to add to that.
Let me ask you this then. The second question I had was, do you feel confident that this is an economically viable option for you? Do you feel like you will be okay? Will you make enough money farming based on, well, a lot of people assume that farming is not a very economically solid thing to do?
I would say that most years, totally fine. There have been years where Mother Nature comes and hits you, and it's like, well, don't really, you have to prepare for those years. You have to make sure that you have money saved back for those years. And overall, I've been able to do it, and I don't see why going forward we shouldn't be able to increase that, especially as we're building our soils and learning more about the process of building our soils, building plant health. The more we do that, the more resilient we're going to be down the road in order to make sure that we are set up economically to keep being sustainable as we go.
Right. I mean, that is a key, isn't it? It's like every year, if you're building soil, you've got a bank. It's a bank account. As your plants are healthier, they're more productive, they're less resistant to disease and insect pressure. It's just
and we have a unique opportunity. And we realize this, where we are in our relationship marketing, we have a very unique opportunity. It's not so unique that it can't be replicated, but At this point, we can nearly sell whatever it is that we wish to produce. It's up to us to produce the best, but also to focus really hard on what it is that we can do on this farm that does well and that isn't going to kill us doing it.
We've really streamlined the products that we're doing now. I mean, I'd say 5 years ago, we were doing 2 to 3 times as many products as what we're doing now. We've really cut back to the ones that we know we enjoy doing. 1, why do things that are miserable? 2, that do really well for us. And 3, if you're doing more, make sure that they're the high dollar crops that you're doing more of, so that it makes it a little more worthwhile.
And we've been able to do that because we've picked up so many other farmers who are looking for a piece of pie too.
That's right.
And so we can diversify all of that.
Smaller farmers that all those little things that take forever for us to do, they can handle them because they're on a smaller scale.
Yeah. Yeah.
It takes both of us communicating constantly and evaluating constantly to continue to see the big picture, but not miss any of the parts.
And it takes the boys too, having their outside eye coming in to say, all right, hey, I see that we're doing this. Maybe we should be shifting towards this, just because at this point we're farming Fridays and Saturdays. And that's Mondays and Tuesdays are harvest days to get everything ready to go to Chicago on Wednesdays, and Wednesday and Thursday are delivery days. So we're gone. And then
Thursday is too. That's down south. You go to Champaign on Thursday.
Yeah, Will's doing Peoria on Wednesdays at this point. One of our boys and I go to Chicago on Wednesdays. Thursday I deliver down to Champaign.
And then I'm usually here with the boys on Thursday now, but this was the second week that we haven't both been gone Wednesday and Thursday. So now that the boys are out of school, it helps that one of them can go to Chicago. And
I think it's cute that you call these young high school men boys. Do you realize you're still a boy? I mean, at least to some of us,
it's all boy. It's all perspective.
They're 2.5 years younger than you. Right?
Oh no, they're a lot younger than that.
Okay. It's great that you have some help, and I bet they enjoy it too.
Yeah,
it's got to be real interesting.
Do they have their own?
They do have their own farm.
They have their own farm that they do. They're one of our down at the farms. They're also in the legacy of the land. So they have their own farm. They do eggs and chickens and produce and all that on top of working here full time. So
that's beautiful.
There are, and we need to say this, there are young people out there willing to work.
They're 14 and 16, and they work their butts off.
You're the two guys?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh! So they've been with you already for a few years, or
2 years.
2 years, yeah.
Wow. Right.
And we trust them explicitly.
Yeah. We could leave for a week and everything would be perfectly fine.
Wow.
Wouldn't have to tell them anything to do. They'd just do it.
All right.
There's going to be a lot of farmers listening to this tape. Oh my God.
I could never leave. Or they're going to say, right, I could never leave my farm to a 14-year-old.
Yeah.
But
it says a lot, though. It says a lot.
Yeah, it does.
Well, I'd like to wrap this up so we don't go too much longer. I just want to be sure if anybody has anything else that they want to say or add to this, Becky or Will or Marty.
I just wanted you to mention at the very beginning you talked about some of the youngest members that were made like $20,000 for the future.
Yeah.
So what kind of things were they?
Tomatoes, strawberries, blackberries,
peppers,
yeah,
potatoes.
Yeah, and sweet potatoes. He had. There was a good amount of diversity. There was a good amount of product of each one. It wasn't like he did a row of sweet potatoes or something like that. He really was able to produce like 600-700 pounds of tomatoes a week, every week. So I mean, there was some scale to it, and super nice kid. And now his younger sister and younger brother are involved and have taken it on. And it's, I guess that's what makes me feel like there's hope and opportunity still. We need to not just, we need to create those opportunities for success. And we as our generation need to fail better at doing that.
I need to go help them real quick.
Sure.
Thanks, Will.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you.
So I'm hoping that, people that hear this will understand, make sure you give that younger generation an opportunity to succeed. I know people who are in their 40s and, they've said, well, my dad won't even give me an acre to farm on our family farm, and he farms 1,000 acres. He's not interested in any of this. What do I do? I says, well, you got to find somebody to get you some land. So I think we all have a responsibility to help each other. John Eichard talks about that in many of his talks and publications. We owe a debt to those who came before us. And we can only repay that to people of the future.
Passing it to the future. Yeah.
So with that, I hope that we can all do that.
Yeah. Thank you, Marty.
Mm-hmm.